Hello everyone, Chaos here, and welcome to another old school RuneScape video. One of the most common questions I get asked on stream is how to get into raids. Whether it be from people with close to zero PVM experience wanting to get right into the big leagues, or players with a ton of solo KCs under their belt wanting to take the next step into their PVM journey. Before my Chambers of Xeric and the Theater of Blood guides dropping next year, I thought it would be the perfect time to talk about this topic to get your raid ready. Boys and girls, if you enjoyed the first video of November, you would help me out tremendously by subscribing with notifications on, dropping a fat like for the YouTube algorithm, and you can join our Discord server with the link in the description to find the people to go raiding with. Before we get into the juicy part of the video, a massive thank you to everyone you see on screen for contributing to this video. These guys are all extremely good at the game, and without them, this guide would have been fairly different. In today's video we will talk about the following. Important prerequisites like crucial quests and levels, a few PVM encounters I recommend to gain more confidence before hitting those big raids with friends, and before each of them we will talk about minimum gear, important upgrades, and go more in depth for each and every raid in old school RuneScape. The only disclaimer is that this isn't a guide for any of them, but rather as much information as possible to know when you are confident enough to start looking for a team. That being said, let's talk about how to get raid ready, and let's begin. Why don't we start from the beginning? In this first segment, I want to talk about quest requirements and why they are so important for your PVM and raiding journey. If you have a questcape, feel free to skip this part, but you may want to get a few refreshers as to what benefits this unlocks. With Desert Treasure 1 you have access to the iconic Ancient Spellbook. I personally still camp these spells when going to TOA to freeze Venom Monkeys, and as a mage DPS in the Theater of Blood, you simply cannot go in without freezes to stop the Maiden Crabs and Nylos in place. By completing Lunar Diplomacy you can use the Lunar Spellbook, and this will be helpful for Chamber's Preparation Room, as well as Vengeance for a few encounters. If your team requires someone on the Lunar Spellbook for the Theater of Blood, you will be venging your team and the pod sharing stamina potions for the Nyla room, as well as boosting potions. By removing Favor in Karen, you can now access the Archaeus Spellbook as soon as you get to this place, but access to Thralls requires completion of the quest A Kingdom Divided. This is a staple spell for every raid when you're good enough, and that extra DPS from your ghost allies will surely come in helpful once you feel more comfy without Ancient or Lunars. Desert Treasure 2 is needed to wear the powerful best in slot rings, most importantly Altar and Magus. The Venator ring isn't really super helpful for raids, but the previous two offer an insane amount of power for whenever you are able to afford them. Altar will massively buff up your scythe, and with a Tunic and Shadow, your Magus Ring's potency will go up to 6% magic damage bonus, and even 8% inside the Tombs of a Mascot. For Cox and TOA, a Bofo with Crystal Armor will be your best friend before you achieve the Almighty Twisted Bow. In order to make said items, you require completion of Song of the Elves for access to Griffinus. Additionally, you should do the Hard Western Diary in order to obtain a Crystal Halberd, which is extremely useful at a bloat in the Theater of Blood. Going back a little bit, you won't even be able to get into the Tombs of a Mascot without a master level quest called Beneath the Cursed Sands. Call me crazy, but I would even say that the final boss of this quest is more difficult than any of the TOA bosses at a 0 invocation difficulty, which is what you should do before getting into those normal level raids while you find your footing. When we talk about activities to get more confident to start raids, we will briefly touch on the Hallowed Sepulchre for movement. To access this agility training method, completion of Sins of the Father is necessary. And finally for questing, you will need both the Haunted Mine and the mini-quest Lair of Tarn Resolver for access to Salve Amulets. By enchanting amulets with a Tarn's Diary, you will have a best in slot item for bloat, and further imbuing it at the Nightmare Zone will be required for the Mystic Skeleton's room at the Chambers of Xeric. Not a quest, but if you want to start learning raids, Void Armor is going to be your go-to. Camp Pest Control until you can afford these items, and get more points for Elite Void after completion of the Hard Western Diary. Finally, I recommend a Rune Pouch since you will be using spells at every single raid, and then to upgrade it to a Divine Rune Pouch with a Thread of Eliteness after a few Tombs of a Mascot KC. I now want to dedicate a short segment to remind you crucial mechanics you should familiarize yourself with to avoid trolling your team. I've made a few videos going over the skills you must learn to improve as a player, so if you want to learn even more, go check them out after this video. The most basic but important mechanic you should learn by heart is a tick system in old school RuneScape. Remember that actions are registered every 0.6 seconds, and if you need a visual cue, get a plugin called Visual Metronome to be able to recognize this timing in many different ways. Something I started doing just as I began my Inferno grind after maxing was the use of F-keys. You can bind them either in the game itself or with a RuneLite plugin called Key Remapping, and you should 100% get used to this to navigate through your menu quicker for things like inventory, prayer, and spells. Something I have used ever since I found a plugin for it is inventory tags. With it, you can outline different colors on your items to avoid thinking too much or even looking closely at your inventory when doing gear switches. This is something you will need to do constantly during raids and for a lot of solo PvM encounters, so start developing the muscle memory to swap your gear as soon as possible. Last for now, so I don't plagiarize both my videos, is that you should understand how movement works in the game. This is not too complicated to understand, but it will be crucial later on to know how your character will reach its destination. Something I have yet to learn is how to efficiently go through Sodesic Maze at the Theater of Blood, and for this we need to get basics of movement down. Let's now put all those skills to the test by going on a few solo PvM encounters that will naturally turn you into a better player. Just like before, I recommend watching 3 of my videos being 10 bosses to start your PvM journey, 10 bosses to get into endgame PvMing, and of course my 2023 bossing ladder video. Again, I will only quickly talk about a few of the most important ones to not recycle my own content further. I would personally not even think about looking to start raids without being comfortable with the Corrupted Gauntlet. Preparation phase is pretty simple once you get the hang of it, but the Corrupted Gauntlet will teach you a ton. You need to take care of prayer switches, gear swapping, positioning, movement, paying attention to visual and audio cues, and watching your health and prayer. This is also free of charge, so you won't be losing any money while you learn. Like I said before, despite not being a PvM encounter, getting comfortable with the Hallowed Sepulchre will be insane for understanding of movement and the ticks. This is also going to heavily improve reaction time, and if you get your PV to sub 7 or even 630, which was a master task back in Leagues 3, you can consider yourself a pretty good player. Not to make this segment too long, I recommend getting good at Zulrah by using both ranged and magic. If you want to do this boss at a pretty high efficiency, you will need to swap gear constantly, giving you a ton of practice for when you get into Chambers of Xeric and the Tombs of a Mascot. It will also help with TOB, but you're not swapping styles as often as the other 2 raids. If you take up to 8 gear switches at Zulrah, you'll develop the muscle memory needed for raids. Okay, so you know what mechanics to somewhat master and what bosses to try before you give the next big step into the PvM journey. Let's now talk a little bit about the levels and the minimum gear you want to get. This is going to depend on what raid and what difficulty you're aiming for, so let's break it down into 3 different categories. I've always said that if you want to at least try an entry mode level Tombs of a Mascot, you're honestly good to go with base level 60s to equip dragon weapons, a rune crossbow, and a humble warped scepter. Keep in mind that this is just for entry mode TOA, and if you want to try anything else with these levels, the chances of finding a team willing to take you will be slim to none. To start getting into Chambers and the Theater of Blood, I would say base level 85s with both the Rigor and Augury unlocked is a pretty good place to start. As for Iron accounts, you shouldn't have much trouble finding mentors to help you out in order to grind those prayer scrolls. For normal mode of TOA though, I would say you're good to go with base level 75s for higher tier weapons, since the bosses are not super beefy. For the absolute gamers wanting to venture into either solo CMs, hard mode Theater of Blood, and 400 plus level raids at the Tombs of a Mascot, I personally wouldn't go with anything lower than base level 90s or even 95s for hard mode Theater of Blood. Ideally though, if you want to be maxed combat, except maybe for prayer for the best chance at finding a group and successful completions. Along levels, one cannot start preparing for raids without proper gear for these encounters. The following is the list of initial setups you can copy for going into learner raids, and keep in mind that we are looking at the base gear as well as a few important upgrades, so you know what to work towards after you start making a little bit of money. The first image is courtesy of We Do Raids and shows the bare minimum items to get into Chambers. You will notice key items such as a Tentacle Whip, a Dragon Crossbow, and a Trident of the Swamp as our main damage dealers. And of course, room-specific items will depend on the raid layout. You can't forget about items like a Light Bearer, God Sword, Pickaxe, a Rune Pouch, just to mention a few. They also have a level and gear progression chart to guide yourself if you find that raiding is something you might want to stick to for a little bit. Some of the most important ones are 78 Herblore for potions, Rigor and Augury, Zynite Jewelry, and when you get more cash, weapons like a Dragon Hunter Lance, Dragon Hunter Crossbow, and a Sanguinity Staff will work wonders before getting those expensive mega weapons. Whoever you're raiding with may tell you about more specific upgrades, but this is the bare minimum I recommend. Oddly enough, starting gear for the Theater of Blood is a lot cheaper because we will be wearing Void for minimal switches and have a lot more room for food. This is the first raid where you actually have damage rolls such as melee DPS, range DPS, North Freeze, and South Freeze. When you decide what you want to focus on, or depending on what the team needs, you should take all 3 styles unless being told that you will be on a specific role. Our most important upgrades will be for the melee style, and progress-wise you're looking at Bando's armor and a face guard with Blade of Seldor, all the way up to Torva and a Sight of Vitur. Prior to that, remember key items like an Amulet of Blood Fury, Primordial or Arania boots, and with more money, an Altar Ring for tons of damage. Range DPS can keep Void and upgrade to a Dishonest Quiver, and for Mage DPS roles, Ancestral Robes along either Code I Want or Toxic Staff of the Dead with a Saturated Heart are your final goal. For specials, don't forget about Dragon Claws, Crystal Halberd, Bandos, Dragon Warhammer, and finally an Elder Maul. Thanks to the Tombs of a Mascot invocation system, an entry-level raid can be done with Void and Dragon weaponry along a Warped Scepter, and we are doing exactly that. The beauty of this raid is that you can customize how difficult you want it to be, and if you start feeling a steep increase in difficulty, you know it's time for a few upgrades. For normal level difficulty anywhere between 150 and 295, important weapons include a Zamihasta, a Blowpipe, and a Trident of the Swamp. If you want to start getting into money raids at level 400 plus either solo or in a group, items like a Fang, Bofa, and a Sanguinesti Staff are heavily recommended. Remember that in any encounter, your weapons are the most important thing to upgrade, and for the Tombs of a Mascot especially, get a Tunic and Shadow first, which is cheaper nowadays, and eventually a Twisted Bow to go along with it. As most of you know, a Scythe of the Tour does not work here, so focus on those two mega weapons and keep grinding cash for the final one to take on Chambers and the TOB trips. So we know what levels we need, what to practice, what gear to gather, and now let's talk about difficulty progression so you know where to start. It's not 100% mandatory to go from least to most difficult, since only you know how good you are at the game, and with proper guidance, one encounter could feel easier than others. We can divide the 3 raids into 14 different difficulties, and we start with entry mode the Tombs of a Mascot in a group. If you and a team do anything under 150 level raid, this means that learners have near 0 PVM experience and want to start their journey on the right foot. Once you get more confident, trying a solo entry level raid is not a bad choice. You can check out my TOA invocation progression from a few months ago, and try turning on as many invocations as you can, to slowly but surely climb all the way up to those normal level raids. Unsurprisingly enough, both a group and then solo normal level Tombs of a Mascot is our next milestone. A level 100 raid is not too different from a 150 for example, but you will actually start to notice a difference starting at 200. When you and a team go on a few of these together, you can then try these on your own to level up your game. Once you quote-unquote master entry and the normal Tombs of a Mascot, you can start dipping your toes into the Theater of Blood. Whether it be solo or in a group, entry-level TOB will teach you all the mechanics you need to know, albeit at a much easier difficulty. This is only meant to serve as a stepping stone into the real thing. Something else you can do in a team is Chambers of Xeric. For this one, I also highly recommend going with people who already know what to do, because I feel like learning this on your own with just YouTube guides can take quite a while. The interesting part about this is that rooms will be randomly generated, and you will need a lot of practice to know which raids are good and which ones you should reset. If you want to step up your game, you can go back to the Tombs of a Mascot whether it be in a group or solo when you gain more confidence. A 300 difficulty rate won't be as far away as group chambers, but with a few extra invocations to all the bosses will start increasing chunkiness, for which you need a lot more DPS. We are getting rid of the random factor in the Chambers of Xeric, and doing Team Challenge Mode Chambers as our next step. I personally think this is a lot easier because you need to do all the rooms, so your setup is not really going to change unless you get a few upgrades. When you're comfortable with Expert TOA and Group CMs, time to step into the Theater of Blood. I always say that unless you go in with a mentor and or a group of learners, this will be the hardest raid to find a group for, because people are almost always looking for players with previous experience. Don't be intimidated though, because just like CMs, the Theater of Blood follows the same path and can be relatively easy to get used to. After this, we have a group or solo money Tombs of a Mascot runs at 400 plus or even 500 for your coveted fan kit. This is heavily recommended to do solo, but if you're looking for a ton of purples, minimum 6-man 400 TOA raids are the way to go. The runner-up spot belongs to solo chambers and solo CMs in that order. This may sound a little sus because you could consider solo cogs to be easier than high-level TOA or even TOB. But in order to be efficient, you need deep understanding of every single room, so you can do at least 2 normal runs per hour and under 1 hour solo challenge mode raids. The pinnacle of raiding in old school RuneScape is definitely hard mode the Theater of Blood. I personally didn't have a ton of trouble getting to these, since only a few crucial things changed throughout the raid. But hey, maybe it was because I got introduced to this activity by running with a full team of Grandmasters. Regardless, this is something you will need to get comfortable with to be called a true gamer. The last thing we should talk about is, well, how to find a group. First off, if you join our Discord, we have mentors for all 3 raids that can easily show you the ropes and even go in with a bigger team. A lot of people are always doing content together, so if you're shy about it, come join the community and get started with PVM and raids. For something even more noob-friendly, you can join the We Do Raids Discord to find the mentors and teams for the Chambers of Xeric, the Theater of Blood, and the Tombstone of Mascot. They have a ton of resources, videos, guides, and much more. Finally, if you want to focus on TOB, I hear great things about Adicon's TOB Discord, which will take you by the hand when learning the potentially most demanding raid in the game. Big shout out to him and his community for putting that server together, so go hit them up for those TOB runs. Ladies and gentlemen, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed and you learned something useful. If you did, tell me what your favorite raid in the game is and why, even if you have a 0 KC in all 3 of them. If you include the term RSN and your username in your comment, you'll be entered in our weekly bond giveaway, for which we will pick a winner on Friday's stream. A massive thank you to all the people you see on screen right now for supporting this channel with a monetary subscription, all of which goes towards my starving family in a third world country. If you want to be part of this list of legends, click the join button below and see all of the cool perks you can get in the videos and the live streams, and of course in the Discord. In the next one, I want to do a quick refresher on how to obtain clue scrolls in the fastest way possible in preparation of Leagues 5, so you can get a ton of points. For now, I hope you have an amazing day, have an amazing week, and I will see you then. Peace.